just we just don't
Is
do
it
this.
turned on?
It's connected to the to the video.
Video camera.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't think that.
Okay.
You want to record this audio in camera also? This audio?
I just want everybody here. Can we start now? Okay, good morning everyone. Thank you so much for being here in the very cold morning. Okay, because I am not a legal expert and I am not a legal professor, so I cannot give you a very academic presentation. What I am going to tell you is a little bit about Vietnam, about what the law say about human rights, the Vietnamese human rights situation, and then you guys will help me to develop the issue about Vietnam. I will tell you more detail about that later. And then I will talk with you about what I am working in Vietnam. And finally, I think the most important section is about question and answer. And I'm looking forward to receive your question. And I feel a little bit sad when Sohav is not be here. Okay. Before going to the main section, I want to tell you something. The first time when I came here, I met a lot of Indian friends, and one of them are here. And they asked me the same question, where am I come from? And a lot of people, am I from, am I Japanese? Am I Korean? Some people think I'm Chinese, but no, I'm from Vietnam. And the following days, a lot of people ask me the same question. What do you eat in Vietnam? How is Vietnam? How is the climate? How is the traditional dress? And a lot of things. And I realized I think that a lot of Indians know they don't know much about Vietnam. That is the reason why I want you to enjoy the song, the music. I'm sorry about the speaker, it's not very good, but you can relax. And I'm so sorry about my poor English. Can you hear a little bit? This is about a very famous song. Can you hear? What should I do? Pause.
Okay, can I just chime in and say something about the song while the thing is restarting?
Yeah.
The song was written by a French Vietnamese girl. They were refugees and her family was taken to France in a songwriting competition, I think. And so she wrote this song about Vietnam, even though she's never ever been. And it's just for a lot of first generation Western born Vietnamese people like me. Like the mother country is something we always hear about, but we don't ever go or don't have the opportunity to go. So, yeah. It's just really popular within the Vietnamese community. Yeah.
In my experience, they're very open and encouraging and love Americans despite the war.
Why did they do this?
Very sophisticated response. We don't make a distinction between the government and people. So.
You can see Hải Phòng is my hometown. Okay, I finished my tourist promotion here. Okay, now go to the main section. I want to talk with you very briefly about what the laws say about the human rights in Vietnam. And the right that I list, what you are seeing in the screen is the fundamental right. Is listed on the Vietnamese constitution. I will not focus on the law because you guys knows about that much. The previous section. I just want to tell you they are what the law say. But is it? I mean, in reality, is it all the Vietnamese can exercise the law in the future? In reality or not? And I want to tell you the problem. In Vietnam, no one in Vietnam can stand up and talk very freely about the human rights problem because that is a very sensitive problem. I cannot tell you very detail about why, but the government say it's related to the politics and the national security. I don't know, but I can tell you that the answer is no, not all the Vietnamese people. So who is the vulnerable group who cannot, who has difficulty to access to the human rights in Vietnam? They are women, children, people living with HIV, disabled, migrant worker, and ethnic minority. It's in Vietnam. But I want to talk from you, how about in US and how about in India? Ranjit, can you tell me the vulnerable? The same?
But not people living with HIV.
Why?
Because their number is very less. In India, the number is very less in comparison to some of the African countries, like in Congo, in Somalia, where the numbers are very high. In comparison, India, HIV numbers are very less. I don't remember the number, but it's very less. And then, yes, women, they are very vulnerable. Children, yes, again, very vulnerable. Disabled, they themselves are given a lot of privileges within the constitution, within the fundamental rights, within the various conventions and treaties. Migrant workers, yes, of course, because they are in a minority, not a religious or ethnic minority, but they come out in small groups. So their human rights are generally in terms of bonded labor or child labor, they are exploited. And last is ethnic minority, then to some extent.
How about in US? Savata?
I would say not so much people living with HIV. I mean, people are ostracized, but I don't think there's any government discrimination against people living with HIV. And we have very strong laws to help the disabled. Public buildings and stuff have to be accessible to the disabled. And, migrant workers is one I would have an issue with, especially workers coming from Mexico and Latin America, undocumented workers, and the way they're treated and taken advantage of because the government fails to recognize them. And ethnic minority, America's a utopia. We don't have
I'm just going to jump in. I'm going to actually disagree and say that people living with HIV are highly stigmatized in the U.S. And
I said they're ostracized, but not by the government.
In terms of just being vulnerability, they're all very vulnerable groups, and I think people living with HIV among
I feel, okay.
I was going to say you have to add gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender.
Oh, okay. And then?
I was going to say that, I agree with what Kendall said, and I also agree with what Ajit said. It's a split difference, but I think one thing about the U.S. is that you can form a group that's very pro support of someone that has like HIV or any of these rights, and the government won't discriminate against you for forming that kind of group, generally speaking. But like ethnic minorities, like in my town, there's a lot of Somali refugees, and there's no like official policy against them, but certainly in the society it's a struggle for them all the time.
I feel a little bit surprised when Ranjit said the people living with HIV is not the vulnerable group in India.
Because it is still very confidential. Like, I may not be aware of how many people are with HIV. HIV is still considered to be something very confidential. Like in society, nobody knows who is HIV. The people don't disclose. Even in the medical inspection rooms, when the people are infected with HIV, they are not supposed to disclose it to everyone. So you don't come to know.
I think when people don't want to tell everybody that they are living with HIV, I think there's a problem of discrimination. How do you think?
Yeah, I think, was it the Delhi Commission? One of the visits that we did, they told us that children in India who are HIV positive were not being allowed to enroll in schools. So I think there is discrimination.
Dr. Nair from the police force.
No, I didn't hear, I don't know. But anyway,
We've
somebody
heard that
told
more
us.
than once.
Yeah.
I think Dr. Nair actually did say something about that, and we certainly heard it the day that we went to the group on children's rights, and or was it the yeah, and it said that they got children enrolled in school who were being explicitly denied the right to enroll only because of their HIV status.
And perhaps they're more vulnerable because they're afraid to tell people they have the virus.
Yeah. Okay.
Can I add one more thing? And I think this is also a group in Vietnam as well, and that's drug addicts, people that are suffering from issues of addiction. And the government is very...
You mean drug user?
Yes, yes.
Maybe, but it's not the main vulnerable group, you know, because in Vietnam, if you are the drug user, you may commit a crime and you have to put in the detention, and it's, I think, okay. So now, as I said before, human rights is a very sensitive problem in Vietnam, and there's a lot of reason, and I can tell you some main reason to, you know, the difficulty and the challenges that Vietnamese government have to face to ensure the human rights for people. That is, okay, the first thing is Vietnam is a developing country. I will tell you more about that later. The second is we have the conflict geographical condition. The next one is the nature condition. The outdated attitude is one of the reasons. And the other reason, like the existence of inconsistent law and etc. Okay, what I want to do now is, I don't want to tell you about very detail about this, but I think it's better if you guys help me to develop the issue by a small exercise, small activity. I want to divide you into 4 groups, and then what I want you to do is, I want you to answer a question. Is it a difficulty in Indian or US or not? And then you will draw a mind map to raise the problem. You can see the example I wrote here. Either anyone from you have never done the mind mapping before? Can you raise your hand? Professor Gear?
Have I done it? In Vietnam.
Okay.
It was not something experienced.
The mind mapping is very simply, you know, you have the issue. Oh, sorry, you cannot write.
It's a curtain.
Oh, sorry.
But I think there's a board in there.
Okay, I can. Okay, here, for instance, you have the main issue like developing country, and then I cannot move. And then you will raise the problem. In the developing country, you may have the problem of poverty, like poorness, and then with the poorness, a lot of people cannot go to school, and maybe the children have to work very hard, and then it can link to the people cannot go to school, and then you will raise the other problem. is and then I want you to help me to find as many as possible the problem. Is there any question?
How much time do they have?
Just 10 minutes. 10 minutes, is that enough for you? Can you count from you?
1,
2,
3,
3, 4.
1,
2, 3, 4.
1, 2, 3.
Okay, thank you. So, who is in the group 1? The group 3, group 4. Okay, in each paper, I give you 5 tips, so you can develop the idea from the tip. It's 4.
I'm going to erase the board in case you want to use it.
Yeah.
Poverty, little social government welfare, lack of education, lack of healthcare institutions. Some more major bullet points that we added was international exploitation from more developed countries, lack of infrastructure to access of information, corruption in government, sanitation issues. So I'll go back to the major one. For poverty, we linked that up to issues of sub-issues of issues of migrant workers, likelihood to have people who under there are likely to have inadequate health care, so that's linked up with lack of healthcare institutions. A lot of these linked up to crime. So for example, lack of education links up to crime, unemployment links up to crime, poverty, these all lead to crime and crime control. Little government social welfare, we said this obviously leads to, no aid probably leads to poverty, leads to illnesses, going back to healthcare institutions. Lack of education was, we thought, a major one. That leads to only a small percentage of the population having power. When you have an ignorant body politic, you find the inability to stand up to advocate for human rights and other political rights. Obviously, going back to the international exploitation from other developed countries, you have unequal bargaining power, leads to exploitation. With the lack of infrastructure to access information, we have the government is in a position to stymie and stifle dissent fairly quickly, inability to organize. With the lack, going back to the healthcare institutions, obviously you get a web, so it's a lot of cross lines. You have a high birth rate and mortality rates. I think that covers all the stuff we discussed.
Okay, thank you. It would be better if we have the flip chart and we can see how it linked together. But it's okay. Thank you. Who is in the group too? Okay, thank you.
Wait, group 4. 2?
No, we're 2.
We're 2, but we got issue 4. Is that right?
It's okay, yeah.
All right, so we have the chart that you can't probably read because it's my handwriting. So we were examining outdated attitudes, and so we were looking at outdated attitudes not only in Vietnam, India, but also the U.S. and how there may be some commonalities. Some of these things may be different places, but so starting here on the left, religious minorities, and we can put that as a big category because there's a lot of outdated attitudes about that. In a place, different countries, converts, the people who switch to a different religion are seen as going against their normal culture or being influenced. They're only doing it because they're being influenced by foreign powers or foreign entities. Sometimes religious minorities are perceived as dangerous, and it's just generally rejecting and not conforming to the culture that they're a part of. Then we looked at outdated attitudes surrounding non-legal status. In other words, people that are in a country without proper documentation that's legitimate by the government. Sometimes they're perceived as job stealers. They're persons that are taking people's jobs. And that refugees aren't really refugees fleeing from a problem, but they're actually just simply trying to come and take money from the country, the host country that they're in. We looked at non-whites as being inferior, and we've had some good discussions in the last couple weeks about skin color and lightness and darkness, and how in places, a lot of countries where people are generally darker skinned, that the lighter of the darker skinned people are seen as being somehow better or an ideal. We looked at outdated attitudes surrounding why men are greater than women. This shows up in workplace discrimination, difference in wages, and that domestic violence is okay or needed to control a woman. We also looked at outdated attitudes that drug users are criminals, and that drug use is in fact not a health issue, that it's actually a choice. I'll just leave that. Then we looked at attitudes surrounding LGBT issues. So lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender issues. Outdated attitudes are that persons that are engaging in these lifestyles, that it's a deviance, that it's a choice, that it's a crime, and somehow wrong or bad. And then we looked at outdated attitudes surrounding HIV. We deviated. We went south went to the southern hemisphere, and we looked at Haiti. In Haiti, it's actually perceived as someone has a bad spirit. So there's this irony that gay culture within the what voodoo religious culture is actually positive, but HIV is seen as a bad spirit. So people have a lack of understanding, and that if you have HIV, you catch it from a toilet seat, a hug, a spoon, a cup. These are outdated attitudes. That if you have HIV, you must be gay. You deserve it. And oh, that was that. Okay, drug use. Also, you must be a drug user for HIV. So all of these things we just looked at were examples of attitudes which cause problems for human rights protections because people still perceive these as being the basis for what's happening. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you. There are 3 points in my mapping that I want to talk about. The first thing about the refugees, it's not a big deal in Vietnam. Yeah, you know. And the second point is the skin color. Did you say about that? It's not a big deal in Vietnam. It's not a problem in Vietnam. And then about the sex worker, I want to tell you more about sex worker in Vietnam. In the other country, sex worker is one of the kind of job. Is that right? How about in US?
What kind of worker?
Job.
Say it again.
I mean, if you are sex worker.
If you're like sick.
Yeah, sex worker. Sex.
Oh,
Sex. Sorry. Sex worker is a job in US.
Yeah.
How about in India?
Well, it's not legal in most places.
Okay. In Vietnam, it's illegal, and you can be put in the jail or in the detention if you are the sex worker. So it's the problem in Vietnam. But I think it takes a long time to change the attitude because everybody in Vietnam here, include the legal maker, student, law professor, they all think that sex worker is illegal. So, okay, next to the following group.
That's a good question. You said that skin color is not like there's no discrimination based on skin color in Vietnam?
Yeah.
Are there considered different races within Vietnam or no?
I don't think that it be discriminate in Vietnam.
Okay, what about different ethnicities, like ethnic minorities, like Chan versus?
Yeah, maybe because, you know, sometimes they think that the minority is not bad, you know, it's not better than the king people, I mean, like me.
So there's discrimination against ethnic minorities, but it's not based on racial, it's not based on skin color.
Yeah. So, okay.
Can you click the next slide?
Okay.
Cool. So our issue was that Vietnam is 3/4 mountainous, very complex geography, and we were supposed to brainstorm about ways that might affect human rights. And so the first thing that we talked about is that because it is so mountainous, there might not be a lot of useful land in the country, which can have economic implications, food implications, and transportation within the country might also be very difficult. We talked about the fact that there is indeed poor transportation in Vietnam, and without adequate transportation, we actually thought this can affect human rights by being a barrier in terms of access to justice and how you get to where you need to go to find help or seek some sort of redress for your problems if it's difficult getting around. The poor transportation problem has potential to isolate small villages and increase the cost of food. We also talked about the lack of electricity, and this issue is near and dear to my heart because it was part of the topic for my master's thesis. Most people don't realize that foodborne illnesses were wiped out in the Western world with the advent of electricity. And without electricity, illnesses is much more common and quite a huge problem. So the villages that go without electricity face challenges that simply just don't exist elsewhere in terms of health. Without electricity, there's also a problem with perpetuating poverty and problems becoming a more developed economy. We talked about the difficulty obtaining legal information, and again, this is obviously an access to justice issue. If people lack the resources to seek out legal redress or don't know how to seek out redress for their rights or even what their rights are, then it's difficult to uphold their rights. And then finally we talked about the lack of schools and lack of hospitals. We thought this was really obvious. The lack of education and lack of health care we thought were denial of rights in and of themselves. We thought that access to education and health should be a fundamental human right, even though not all countries agree with that. Lack of education also leads to a lack of awareness. And we talked about the Harriana experience that we had last week and how even just a little bit of education can really empower people to access justice and defend their rights. But without that education, they remain largely disempowered, disenfranchised, and their rights were getting trampled on. And so we kind of tied the Harriana experience that we had last week into this exercise and what we would expect to find in a place like Vietnam. Any questions? All right.
Thank you. I have no comment because everything you talk about is very suitable to Vietnam. And then we next to the last group.
So we had natural disasters, and we were choosing the U.S. and its response to natural disasters. And I think the starting point for our discussion was that in the U.S., currently we have resources to cope with that. For a moment, I'm going to ask you to ignore responses to Katrina. And so with resources, currently it's sufficient, but then the question comes up, what happens when they begin to deplete? So whether you're talking about global warming and perhaps impacts there with more severe begin to deplete, you begin to see a difference in the response based on wealth, poverty, race, and ethnicity. And again, in the U.S., for the most part, we have resources to cope. So if you think of oranges being frozen in Florida, how we respond, floods in the Midwest and Red River Valley, how we respond, fires in California, we're able to respond. But I think what we said probably the first week was, one of the lecturers was, human rights are never secure. We always have to make sure we try to secure them. So for the U.S., something to consider is, currently we've had the luxury of resources. What happens when we have to make tough choices? And I think that's where we were just starting to kind of explore, that's when we have to make the decisions of how you protect them. And for most of us, we haven't had to make that decision. And I think it's kind of thinking about how will we react when we have to make those choices. And again, Katrina is probably a good example of where we probably failed. I think a lot of the response was because of the city. Had it been a different city with a different makeup, our response might have been a little quicker. But hard to tell that way.
Are you saying there's a racial harm?
Racial harm, also economic too.
With Katrina?
Yeah. So that, because if we're going to protect an economic resource, we're all in. But if it's not perceived that way, our response is quite different too. And that's where we draw a line between wealth, poverty, and race, ethnicity. How much of a link is there also?
So the natural condition is one of the difficulty in U.S. Sure.
Currently, we have resources where we're, compared to a developing country, we're able to respond far better than a developing country would. But a lot of our discussion was, what will happen when we can't? A few more years of an economic downturn, certainly you can see how we make decisions. We make them economically based, not necessarily human rights based.
So other members...
Just to add one thing, and that is that we also make choices in terms of that. The reason we have the economic deployment down there is that we choose how we respond to our natural disasters, and those choices are driven by issues of wealth and poverty as well, because you have, for example, in Katrina, there was a land grab going on, and a lot of the decisions on how to respond to Katrina was based on who you can disregard in terms of building an economic wealth. You can disregard people of certain races and ethnicities and go in and build wealth by grabbing land. And so natural disasters become opportunities as well as things to manage.
How about the crop failure? I mean, the crop failure.
Well, crop failure, we didn't discuss that a whole lot, partially because I don't have experience with it. I mean, we always read about, you know, the freezes in Florida and the oranges, but it doesn't impact my life. And honestly, I didn't know how we respond to that. I mean, there is an increase, that's part of what we talked about, like you might notice increase at the grocery store, but for most of us, that's a relatively small decision as consumers. Not being from Florida, I can't speak to the impact, so we're talking orange growers here, specifically how it impacts them, because obviously that's going to be a little more severe.
And how...
But we did mention we also have a very diverse economy, and that does, as a whole, builds a safety net.
And the last point is the difficulties in US or not? I mean, the epidemic disease?
With diseases, again, we are able to respond, but if you consider, I won't put them quite in that category. I was thinking of our response to HIV. Obviously, our response was quite different because it was perceived as a gay disease. And it took us a very long time to start responding. Another example would be breast cancer. The response to that, because obviously that affects women, was quite different than a lot of our other diseases. So when it comes to diseases, it does tend to still break down by those vulnerable groups. If it's going to impact that group, our response does seem to be different.
The last member in the group, do you want to add something?
I'd say epidemic diseases are really a big problem in general in the U.S.
Yes, sir. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much. After your group discussion, I think I will add more idea about in my slides. And then, okay, now I want to talk with you about what I'm working in Vietnam. Okay, I come from the Institute for Research on Policy, Law and Development. We can call that as PLD Vietnam. And it is one of the NGO in Vietnam. You know, there's a lot of NGOs in Vietnam, but just few NGO working in the law field. So PLD Vietnam is one of that numbers. We have 4 kinds of work. The first one is the legal aid project. It's about 40%. And the next one is clinical legal education project, and it's about 35%. The next one is the academic research project. It's about 20%, and for the other work, it's about 5%. And then I will show you some. Okay, the first one is about the legal aid project. We organize the workshop for the people come from the other community, and the community that you are looking in the screen is the people living with HIV, and we help them to know more about how the law protects them, and and then sometimes how to improve the current law. It's about the training workshop for the people come from the other NGOs. The NGO that we are helping is the name Light. That is the migrant worker project, and the people that you are seeing in the screen, they are peer migrant worker, and they are staff from the other NGOs. And you know, for the legal aid project, we also write some book, some leaflet to help people know more about rights and obligation. And we have very interesting project that we are working on is about helping people living with HIV, and we are designing a curriculum. There's a lot of chapter about rights of people living with HIV, and I will share you more about my experience later. And it's one of the big projects that we are working on, clinical legal education project. The clinical legal education is very new in Vietnam, and for this project, PLD Vietnam is like we connect all the university law school in Vietnam together, and they help them to establish, manage their law clinic. Okay, this is the first workshop, the training workshop about clinical legal education that we organized last year. And the people you can see here, they are law professor and law student come from the law university throughout Vietnam. The next one is the community teaching section, community teaching. This is the community teaching conducted by a student from Vinh University in the middle of Vietnam. And then the training workshop. And the last picture you can see Fraser. He's presenting about Indian clinical legal education, and he's very great. Okay, one of the projects that we are working on is academic research project. It's quite, academic, and to me it's boring. Okay, for this kind of project, we organize a lot of round table at the conference. The picture you are seeing in the screen is about the round table about the complaint, administrative complaint mechanism, and the international conference. And then we also write a lot of books to help people to know about their rights. The picture that you are seeing is the manual about gender equity. Does that make sense to you? Okay. The last one is the book that I'm showing you is very interesting book. It's about how to improve the legal making process in Vietnam, the solution and situation.
Is there a U.S. rule in the population?
What's that?
It's a POV and then...
the logos? Sorry, I don't know. This book was written before I came to Vietnam, to POD for work. I don't know, but I will find out.
Is that a BATSI project?
No,
Oh,
it's not.
I know they get your
Yeah, we work very close to BAPSI in the clinical legal education project and some legal aid project, but not for the academic research project. And okay, for the other work, in POD, we are not the teaching situation, so we don't have our own student, but we connect the other student come from the other university in Hanoi. We work together and we did some teaching, community teaching together, and that's the other work I want to tell you. Okay, the picture you are seeing is about the legal, how can I say, legal English teaching. You can see it's about a workshop, a mini workshop to share everybody about how to get the scholarship in US. And okay, you can see everybody, every student sit together and prepare the lesson plan before coming to the community. Okay, that's all. Thank you so much for listening. Is there any questions?
Is the sex workers in Vietnam, is it like India where the majority of them are trafficked and forced into it, or is it by choice type of, like they're not, like in India we've read about and we've seen a lot of the sex workers that are trafficked, like they have an owner basically, or
You mean,
is it the same type of system?
you mean they sit in the street and, sorry, I did not guess.
That they're forced into it against their will, or are they just doing it because that's...
There's a lot of reasons. Some people volunteer to do, and some people is forced to do, like trafficking, you know. Is that the same in India? Okay.
In your work at the NGO, in your experience, how much compromise do you have to make when being pressured by the government in your particular projects?
By government? How many?
Do you find that the NGO has to make compromises in their projects or changes in direction, objectives, based on pressure, directly or indirect?
Yes, you know, NGO in Vietnam is kind of, you know, how can I say, opposite with the government to help people to get the justice. So I cannot tell you detail about how many, but there are quite a lot.
Some of the NGOs will call themselves education organizations when they're human rights organizations to deal with that.
Yeah. Okay.
Who are your donors, and do you feel pressured to work on certain issues because of the donors?
Yeah, about the donor, we have, I can tell you some UNDP, Asia Foundation is one of the